Hey guys, this is the Fantasy Labs podcast. Thanks for joining. I am Bryan. As always, I'm here with Bales and Tank. No Peter this week, but we still got three of the four, so that's good. And this is our Wednesday night podcast where we go over the entire NFL slate, starting with Thursday, and then we get to the Sunday and Monday games, of course. So we kind of did it a little bit differently last week. We went with positions, and I heard a lot of you guys say that you liked kind of when we went the game by game breakdown and got Tank's thoughts on the game. So I think we're going to do that. But I think we're going to get right into it so we can try to get as much analysis as that in as possible. So let's start with the Thursday night game. It's Dolphins at Patriots. Over-unders is highest of the slate, actually, so I think this kind of makes it interesting as far as Bales, whether you want to fade this or whether you are interested at all. Over-unders 51. Patriots are 8-point favorites, so it puts implied points at 21.5 for Dolphins, and Patriots are up at 29.5, which is the highest on the slate as well. So, Tank, what are your thoughts on this one?
I mean, first thing I can say is that I'm really interested to see how this game plays out, especially the way the Dolphins have been playing the last couple of weeks. I mean, I think they've made a full transition to run first, and that set up their offense. I mean, where they've had a lot of explosive plays. I mean, if you look at that game last week, well, a couple weeks ago against Tennessee, they were doing well, running Lamar Miller, and then again against Houston, then that set up a lot of play-action passes. And then they just had guys making plays, whether it was Landry, Rashard Matthews, like all those guys were just balling out. And so I'm interested to see if they can go up to New England on a short week and get the job done. I mean, I think it's going to be one of those games where you could see New England going with a similar approach since, I mean, that's another thing, too. The Dolphins' defensive line was playing behind the line of scrimmage in both of those games, whether it was against Houston or Tennessee. And so is it one of those games where New England tries to challenge them with the run game, or do they go with a similar approach as the Jets and other teams that are stout against the run and they just throw the ball almost every play? And with that being the case, I think Brady is definitely one of your top options just because regardless of the matchup, he's going to ball. I mean, your regular players as far as receivers with Gronk, Edelman, Amendola's kind of stepped out the past couple of weeks because you had LaFell and some of these other guys with a bunch of drops. With the injury to Lewis, I mean, it seems like it's LeGarrette Blount, but will he get enough carries to justify his role, especially going against the Dolphins, who are very improved against the run nowadays? And then on the flip side, I mean, that Patriots bend but don't break defense, they've been a little bit more stout against the run than in years past, so that may scare some folks from Lamar Miller, but I think the Dolphins will try to run the ball against them, and he may not have a great statistical game like he has the past couple of weeks, but, I mean, he should be solid, but the better plays would be if, the Patriots get ahead and then it's Tannehill and, Landry or Tannehill and Matthews, blowing up for, a huge game, just trying to stay in it with the Patriots.
Yeah, I think this is a perfect example of the difference between, as a DFS player, are we looking mainly for players who are in really good situations, or are we looking solely at value? And I think most people say DFS is a game of seeking value, and I disagree. In some ways, I think the value is important, but how we define value matters. And I think that the standard way is to look at a guy's median projection and his price, but that sort of ignores the range of potential outcomes for a player. And I think that range and distribution, the probability of him performing at certain levels, is really the most important thing as a daily fantasy player. And so there's a few Dolphins who I think are underpriced, like Tannehill, I think at 5,600 is underpriced for sure. Lamar Miller, can't recall his price offhand, but he's quite cheap. And potentially Jarvis Landry in cash games. But they're players who I think have a lot of risk associated with them. So if you're going to play those guys, I think that you're just taking on a little bit, maybe too much risk relative to what the strict value would dictate. So don't love those guys maybe as much as their dollar per point suggests. In tournaments, probably not going to play that much because I do like the Patriots, and when I like a team on Thursday night, I'm more likely I think to actually fade the games. I think that the Patriots D is in a really good spot. Dolphins are at, I think, 21 projected points. Something mediocre, but Tannehill can take some chances, I think, when they're down, and there's a good chance that they're going to be down in New England. So I think that plays on the table. But, yeah, overall, probably not going to be playing too many Thursday leagues for that reason.
It seems like it's kind of been the case this year, right? Where we've been like you said, you kind of want to fade a Thursday game if you actually kind of like it, which kind of seems counterintuitive. But it kind of seems like we've had some teams and matchups where you've had to do that a lot recently.
Yeah, it does seem like the NFL has sort of changed its schedule because I remember a year or two ago, I played actually more volume on Thursdays than I did on Sundays because they would just throw anybody out there. It was like so many I don't know, Titans, Bengals sorts of matchups.
The shitty teams. Yeah, just go ahead.
Yeah, because they knew anyone
like the London games.
Yeah, the London games. You always have the Jags over there. So yeah, it's always been a similar situation with the Thursday games, but it hasn't been that much this year. I haven't looked at the remaining schedule for Thursday games, but yeah, it does seem like they've sort of changed that, and I haven't actually played that much Thursday action this year.
Yeah. That's kind of how I've thought about it as well. So speaking of kind of the crappy games, let's dive right into it. So first Sunday game we'll discuss is the Lions at the Chiefs. Over/under is 45.5. Chiefs are 4.5 points. 4.5 point favorites right now. And so that puts implied points at Lions at 20.5 and Chiefs at 25.5. No, I'm sorry, at 25. So obviously Lions coaching change. Tank, what are your thoughts on that and what's going to happen this Sunday?
I mean, the one thing I like about this game is that you have the 24th and 25th ranked pass defenses going in this game overseas. And so, I mean, I think that bodes really well, especially for Matthew Stafford. I've never really been a huge fan of Alex Smith, even though he can have his moments. But, I mean, I think going against that Kansas City secondary, even though they got a couple players back that struggled, throughout the year. I mean, having a Matthew Stafford that's playing a little bit better, even though they lose the offensive coordinator. Thinking about Stafford, Golden Tate, Calvin Johnson, those guys going against Kansas City. I mean, that definitely looks appealing. And then I think when you look at Kansas City, I mean, Detroit's secondary is giving up a lot of plays, especially in the slot. And then you have Kelsey, even though you would expect Kelsey to get off a little bit more. Is Macklin still banged up?
I think, yeah.
Macklin should be playing.
He should be back. Yeah, he was kind of a later scratch because of that concussion, but I would assume that he'll be back.
Yeah, so if Macklin's playing, I mean, that actually makes it better for both of them because with Macklin out, I mean, that allows the defense to focus solely on Kelsey. So, I mean, you would think, all of his players out, Kelsey should get off, but then, you double cover him pretty much and force someone else to beat you. I think the other receiver, I can't even remember his name, but he's the one that scored the touchdown. And so with Macklin being back in the fold, that should, allow either one of those guys to get off instead of having, sole attention on them. So, I mean, they can be viable GPP plays as well. And at the same time, that Detroit run game has been pretty bad this year, so you may be able to find a cheap option with whatever his name is, Derek or the West kid from Kansas City. So it could be a viable play. And the only thing is with that Detroit running game, you don't know what they're going to do. I mean, Abdullah's had the fumbling issues and all that stuff. So really don't know who you would touch. And plus, Kansas City's run defense has been pretty stout throughout the year. So if I was going to play anything against those guys, it would be either Stafford or the pass catchers.
Yeah, worth noting because the game is at I think like 9:30 or whatever Eastern. It's not going to be an option for most slates if you're just playing a typical Sunday only or a Sunday Monday traditional league. Not going to be that much, but if you like some guys in this game, you could potentially increase your cash game action. I don't think that there's any players that I really like too much in cash. I do like the tight ends most in this game, so Ebron and Kelsey, I think, are definitely both in play. Tank touched on Kelsey, and I think the Chiefs are at 20. Right, so that's a good number. And then with Charles out, I even though he hasn't scored, I do think Kelsey is gonna increase his market share of touchdowns for the rest of the season in that offense. So yeah, I kind of like him. I think Alex Smith is a really good value, but again, probably one of those guys who offers more value in a vacuum than what there is in real life. He has limited upside, I think. So yeah, if you like one of those guys, you can play some cash, but there's not going to be too much tournament action because the game starts so early.
Yeah, so Tank, what are your thoughts on that coaching change? I mean, we saw, just a couple of weeks ago, the Dolphins, made a change, and then all of a sudden now they're like an offensive juggernaut. Do you think anything similar could happen with the Lions, where they actually start using their wide receivers a little bit more?
I mean, potentially. I mean, I think one thing that benefited the Dolphins was, one, the coaching change, which led to a change in offensive philosophy where they put more emphasis on running the ball to set up the rest of the offense, which has been effective for them. And then at the same time, they got healthier on the offensive line as well. Detroit's offensive line has been a mess, and I don't see it getting any better. I mean, there are some times where I remember playing and watching film, and you're able to pick up on a coach's tendencies, and you'll know like certain formations, what's coming, and so then that allows you to kind of jump routes and pick off passes and stuff like that. So, I mean, Lombardi may have been a little bit too predictable and then change it up enough. So maybe if you get, someone who kind of goes against their trends, you could see them taking advantage on the offensive side of the ball. But I don't think that just having that coaching change is going to make a significant difference. But it could help improve the offense. Or maybe just that shakeup could motivate everyone, saying that, these guys have been on their way out. And so if something doesn't change around soon, our job's on the line too. And so that can definitely, grab the other coaches and the players' attention.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay, so let's move on and get to the later Sunday games. So the 1:00 slate. First one is Cardinals at the Browns. Over under is 46. Cardinals are 4.5-point favorites right now. So to put some fly points at Cardinals at 25.25 and Browns at 20.8. So Tank, what are your thoughts on this one? Do you think the Cardinals? It seems a little bit low, I guess, but I guess the Browns at home maybe can keep it close.
I mean, that's what I was thinking, like only 4.5.
Yeah.
I mean, I know they kind of struggled against, the Ravens last Monday and just kind of barely pulled it out. But, I mean, that Browns defense is terrible, bro. I mean, like, they haven't shown me anything all year. I mean, I think Hayden, I'm not sure what his status is going to be, but he's still been out. People have been able to run the ball all over him. I mean, so... honestly, I think whenever we think about the Arizona Cardinals, we automatically think about Carson, Fitzgerald. You think about John Brown, and then Michael Floyd has been kind of coming on lately. But, I think this could be a sneaky good play for Chris Johnson just because, he's gotten the lion's share of the carries. I think Andre Ellington has just been regulated to maybe a few carries a game, and the same with David Johnson. So, this is Chris Johnson's show. He has a really great matchup. I'm not sure what his value is on DraftKings, but I can see him being a really good play, probably regardless of the price. One, because it's a great matchup. They're going to run the ball heavily with him. And, he's just not a sexy pick because everyone thinks about Ellington. They think about David Johnson. So they probably won't think he'll get enough carries to justify whatever price he's at, but he'll definitely be a good play. When you look at the flip side of the ball, besides Barnage, who balls out regardless of who the hell is covering him. Like, that dude is an animal. So Barnage is in play, and I think that's about it. And, of course, the Cardinals' defense, because regardless of if it's Josh McCown, who I call interception, or Johnny Manziel, who hasn't had enough reps to be called interception, both of those guys will probably give up a lot of turnovers given the opportunity. So, yeah, all Cardinals.
Cool.
Yep, Cardinals definitely in play. They're in a great spot. I think Chris Johnson is probably the best play in this game, although I would have some concerns about the workload there to trust him in cash games. I won't play him in cash even though he's underpriced. Probably will, or definitely will have him in some tournament lineups. I think Michael Floyd is still underpriced, but also not going to see enough targets to have huge upside in tournaments unless he gets deep a couple times. So you're betting on some a couple low frequency events that it's just unlikely that he has a huge ceiling in that game, but also not a high floor. So the value is again maybe a little bit misleading. And yeah, Barnage I think is definitely in play just because he's getting a good number of targets. I don't think he's a great player. I think that he's just like running hot right now. He's like the equivalent of a poker player who's just getting dealt really good hands and is winning and might not be a good player. Because of the age, if he's a great player, why haven't we seen him play great in the past? So I think it's just more a matter of the workload there, and because he's getting that, I think he's in play. The Cardinals have one of the better defenses against tight ends this year, historically really bad against tight ends, so that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Probably not going to happen that much because I like some other guys, but that's my take on the game. I would say Chris Johnson is the best play.
Yeah, I agree. I can't really think of anything else to say. So we'll keep on moving. Bengals at Steelers is the next game that we can go over. Over-under is 47.5 right now, and it's actually one of two games that are pick'ems. We actually don't have the line on Titans and Texans right now because it's questionable whether Mariota is going to play. Which I think that game's really interesting, kind of depending on that. But so we got two pick'ems right back to back. Bengals Steelers is that first one, so it puts implied points at Bengals at 23.8 and Steelers also at 23.8. So yeah, interesting game. I think that Big Ben is kind of on track to start, which maybe makes the offense for Pittsburgh a little more intriguing than it has been the last couple of weeks. Tank, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think if he's mobile, if he's not just back there, laboring around as an easy target for the Cincinnati pass rush, then it definitely makes the game interesting because, I mean, Cincinnati has a really good defense, but then at the same time, they've been gashed versus the run. I mean, I think if you recall a couple of weeks or so ago, Rawls from Seattle got busy on them. So if Rawls can get off, just imagine what Le'Veon Bell could do. I mean, I think he's probably the highest price back this week at 8,300. But I mean, I think if you have a healthy Ben Roethlisberger where they have to pay their attention to, Antonio Brown, Martavis Bryant, because I think if you recall from last year, Martavis Bryant caught like a 90-yard touchdown. Antonio Brown has gotten off on them consistently. So if they have to pay significant attention to the pass game, then that can really open it up for Le'Veon Bell. So just thinking about that, I really like all of those guys. On the Cincinnati side of the ball, I think Pittsburgh has been right around the middle versus the run, and then at the same time, you've seen Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill pretty much split carries, even though Gio is more of the lead back right now. And I think the game probably lends itself to Gio, especially if Ben Roethlisberger is healthy and they're throwing the ball around a lot. I really like A.J. Green in this game too. I mean, traditionally against Pittsburgh, he's always had issues with Ike Taylor. Ike Taylor isn't there anymore. That Pittsburgh secondary has been toasted, a lot this year. So I can see A.J. really getting off. And on the flip side too, they've been targeting Marvin Jones a lot lately, so he could, have a decent game on the other side. And then of course, Tyler Eifert, and you can't forget about Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton has been one of the hottest quarterbacks. He's not sexy just because, I've owned Andy Dalton in season-long leagues probably the past couple of years at some point, whether the whole season or partial way through the season, and he'll get hot, and then right when you think you can depend on him, he will burn you. And so I've been waiting for him to burn folks, but it just hasn't happened. So I think I'm going to just keep stacking my chips on him now, especially when he has a good matchup, and just ride him out until he falters. But he's been playing unbelievable ball, and hopefully it continues.
Yep, I like Dalton a lot. Dalton's one of my top quarterbacks. If you look at the opponent plus minus allowed for quarterbacks, the Steelers rank I think bottom 5 in the league. So they've been really bad against even some mediocre quarterbacks. I think Dalton is underpriced there at 6,000. There's a number of players who I like in this game, even though both teams are projected moderately. So you said it was, I think, 23.8 each, slightly above average or right around average.
It's pretty much average, yeah.
Yeah, I think, what's the league average for just points, like 23.5 or somewhere around there. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty much average projection, but there's some guys who are underpriced just because for various reasons. A lot has to do with recent play. So AJ Green hasn't been good of late, but there's no reason to think that we know he's an elite player. Priced at 7,600. So that is, let's see, maybe 10th or so among, maybe 11th among receivers.
Mm.
Super cheap. Anytime you can get a player like AJ Green at that price in a good matchup, I mean, it just seems like an obvious play. To me, I think Eifert's on the table. Don't like him quite as much as some other tight ends. But a Dalton Green stack, I think, makes a ton of sense. And at the
Mm.
price, um, I'm still comfortable enough, I think, with Dalton in cash games where if someone made that play, I wouldn't think that that would be horrible. And then on the other side of the ball, and it just depends what happens with Big Ben.
Yeah.
As long as he's back, I think that obviously helps Antonio. It helps everybody. And again, Martavis at 53, I think, underpriced. Antonio
Mm.
Brown, we over the past since the last season, we haven't been able to get him at this sort of price tag.
Mm.
This matchup is not that great, probably against a pretty good Bengals defense, but he is more matchup independent than a lot of other receivers, as is Le'Veon Bell because of the pass catching ability. So the game script doesn't matter as much, and they we'll see a lot of short targets. Both of those guys that increases their floor. So I think that both of those guys are definitely in place. So just a lot of guys that I'm going to have exposure to. Because I don't think that the total in the game reflects the fantasy value of the players.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And this is something that I've been thinking about because we just released our NBA stuff. This week, like we're recording this on Wednesday. Yeah, NBA started yesterday, so I've been kind of heavy into NBA, which is kind of interesting because I can think about NBA while I'm doing NFL and NFL while I'm doing NBA, so I can kind of compare the two. And so I've been thinking about these spreads because we have pick'ems in these next two, and so I've been trying to figure out how I feel about like how important spreads are in the NFL as opposed to NBA. Bales, what are your thoughts on that? Because I know that like spreads are pretty important in basketball, but is it something that you pay attention to a lot in NFL, or is it just kind of once it gets to a certain point, then you do?
I pay attention to it, but I pay attention to um, I think some different things than other people, like betting percentages, where money's going,
Mm-hmm.
what the actual spread is versus the projected team total. Because if you compare it to a sport like baseball, baseball is more standardized, so the lines and the play is more correlated. Like every good thing that happens for a baseball player is good for every single one of his teammates. If a guy gets a hit, that's good for every other player on his team. Whereas in football and basketball, players cannibalize points from one another. So there's a way stronger correlation between the Vegas lines and fantasy scoring in baseball than there is in football. So I don't care as much. And then the fact that football offenses are so different, right? Like some, like say the Cardinals throw or the Ravens, they throw downfield all the time, whereas the Steelers, will throw a bunch of quick screens to Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell, and you have a bunch of teams like that throw short, and just the nature of the offenses is different, where certain teams can rack up points on a PPR site without necessarily scoring a lot of actual points, whereas
Mm-hmm.
other teams are more dependent on those touchdowns for fantasy scoring, and those teams I think are more volatile, and it just creates a situation where there's not as strong of a correlation as there is in other sports. So
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely look at it. It's not that it doesn't matter. It matter. It's still a decent factor for sure, especially when you see an offense that's projected way. It just doesn't look right. Um, but yeah, it's not something that I look at as strongly as an MLB for sure.
Yeah. Okay, gotcha. So let's move on. Next game is Vikings and the Bears. So this is one of the lower over/unders. It's the third lowest, it looks like, at 42.5, and it's a pick 'em as well. So the Vikings and the Bears are both at 21.3. So they're pretty low over under and pretty low implied points. So obviously Vegas isn't necessarily expecting a ton of goodness here. Tank, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, just thinking about Minnesota, I think Adrian Peterson has a really good matchup against the Bears defense, their rush defense. I mean, I think they're giving up close to 125 yards a game. The one thing that's hurt AP is that, he hasn't really gotten in the end zone as much as we're accustomed to seeing. But, at the same time, I think he has a really good matchup. That offense really flows through the running game. So I would expect him to at least get his yards and then maybe get a touchdown, and then that will bode well for him. If you're looking at other guys in Minnesota, that Chicago pass defense, they aren't giving up a lot of yards, but I mean, I think the completion percentage is probably really high on them, and they've given up a lot of touchdowns too. So just looking at it from that standpoint, I mean, I really like, what Teddy's been able to do in the past game, especially since Stephon Diggs has come on the scene. Like, that dude, I think he started against Denver, which was a really tough matchup, and had a solid out, and they went into the bye week, and then he's just been balling ever since, and he made another great catch last week. So with this matchup, I'm going to keep riding him until the wheels fall off because, Teddy's looking his way, and they made him probably like their secondary focus on offense right behind Peterson. So I really like Stephon Diggs. Other than that, I mean, I really don't like anyone else. I mean, I think Teddy has a good matchup just because the Bears' pass defense is shitty, but there may be similar plays that you wouldn't take someone else. I'm not exactly sure what he's priced. But then on the flip side, I always like Forte, especially against Minnesota's run defense. They've been a little bit better as of late, but I still remember that Carlos Hyde performance in Week 1 and know that can rear his head around at any moment, and if it's going to happen, I mean, it could be, Forte who probably, gets about 50% of the touches in that offense. So I really like him. Cutler could be a sneaky good play. If Alshon's back, then I like Alshon. And then Martellus Bennett is always a viable play. And, Cutler's actually been a little bit better with his turnovers, but that's another thing, too. I mean, that can always rear his head around as well. So the Vikings defense could be a sneaky play, just depending on how all that pans out. But I think it'll be a really competitive game, and it could end up being one of those games where, a lot more points are scored than what's shown in the over-under.
Yeah, the two players I like most for sure are Diggs and Jeffrey, who I think are both underpriced. And Jeffrey is very similar to A.J. Green in that you're getting a really dominant player. A.J. Green in a better matchup, but he costs a little bit more. Jeffrey just very, very underpriced, I think, relative to his talent. And I care so much more about talent at a position like receiver than I do at running back. So Jeffrey is, I think, 6,400. Is that right?
Yeah.
It's just a crazy low amount for a player like that he's big, he can score. They're going to have to throw to him a bunch, I think. So, yeah, he's one of my favorite plays of the week. And then Diggs, I think we have some good evidence that he is a very talented receiver. They're using him more. He's basically like the 1B option in their passing game, or maybe even number 1 now. And he's getting a good amount of targets. Not like he's getting 5 targets and he's had 4 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown. He's getting a decent number of targets, so I'm less concerned about regression with him. So I think his price should have jumped a lot more than it did. So those are my 2 favorite plays by far in this game.
Yeah, Bales, just a question for you. What are your thoughts on pricing this year? It just seems a little odd, like especially with like quarterbacks and I don't know, maybe just kind of all the positions in general. Like we have a guy like Phillip Rivers, who I know we're going to get to in a second, who kind of his price really hasn't increased despite he's had like 4 or 5 weeks in a row where he's had almost 30 fantasy points or over. And it just kind of seems like, I mean, part of this is just kind of the volatility of positions in general. Like we have, cheap running backs who go off every week. That's just kind of how the NFL is. But it just seems like it just like hasn't really been worth it to pay up for guys this year. and it's almost like made it so like if you left more salary on the table, it was okay. Just because there's so many value guys. I don't know. Like, do you think that's just been kind of fluky this year, or maybe I'm just overthinking it, or is
I
it
think,
maybe time
yeah.
to adjust?
No, I think it's a combination. In cash games, I'm not. It's still not so inefficient that you should be leaving much salary on the table, in my opinion. I think you can do that in tournaments, but
Yeah.
in cash games, you have to make so like even if you leave say $700 on the table, you have to make so many assumptions. There's probably I don't know 50 different upgrades that you could potentially make in your lineup, and you have to assume that every single one of those upgrades wouldn't help your lineup, and I think that that's just um, that's a pretty big assumption to make, even if pricing is more or less inefficient. So I think it's been mostly fluky, but I also think that there's been a lot of players who have been priced low. I don't know what the reasoning is behind the pricing, but there have been some guys who the sites have been a little bit slow to adjust to. Um, yeah, so Rivers is one. Uh, Stephon Diggs, again, I think should be priced higher. Even like Todd Gurley now should be priced higher than he is against the
Hmm.
Niners. So, um, yeah, I don't think that it necessarily affects how much salary cap you use, but uh, especially in cash games, but I think it is something to look at if it creates a different sort of distribution at each position in terms of salary, which it has. So there's been some really good quarterbacks. We saw Stafford, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, priced at, I think it was at 5,200 or 5,300. If it creates a larger deviation in the pricing where the opportunity cost of paying up for someone like Gronk or Brady is it becomes greater, where you should be going cheaper and then just spending money on guys who you know you can count on who cost a lot, guys like maybe Le'Veon Bell and really safe picks like that.
Yeah, and I guess maybe that's the interesting thing that I'm talking about is the fact that in past years it seems like the positions that you count on that you were like saved money so you could pay up for were the guys like Le'Veon and those top tier running backs, whereas like last week we had Gurley and Lamar who were kind of the clear top five running backs at 5K or under. So it just seems a little weird. Like it's almost like the wide receivers are the ones that are the safest positions. Like you can feel good about paying it for Julio and DeAndre. I don't know. We're thinking about it at least. So let's keep on moving. We got about half the games left. Giants at Saints is the next one. This is one of the highest over/unders. It's 49. Saints are at 3.5 point favorites. So Giants are at 22.8 and Saints are up at 26.3. So Tank, what are your thoughts on this?
Two secondaries are used to getting burned on a regular basis. So, I mean, I really like this game, but at the same time, you had two offenses that, have been struggling at times during this year. But what I've seen, at least from my film study, especially this week, looking at the Saints and Colts game, Drew Brees' shoulder looks to be getting better and better by the week. I mean, I noticed on some of the deep balls he had, some good velocity on the ball. He had, great touch accuracy with it. I mean, so I feel confident in his shoulder and that offense will continue to trend in the upward direction. So when I look at that in the matchup against the Giants, especially, I think Prince is still out. So, I really like Breeze. I mean, he's starting to. I mean, Peyton had Cooks targeted early and often in that game. They try to give him a lot of looks to get him going. So I kind of look at Cooks the way I've been looking at Michael Floyd lately, how they're just trying to get him more integrated to the offense, even though Michael Floyd would never overtake Fitzgerald or anything like that. But when you see a player that's either coming off an injury or really hasn't put up the stats he's accustomed to getting or they want him to get, they try to make an emphasis to kind of target that guy to get him going. And that offense will definitely be sparked by a big game by Cook. So this could be the week. Another good play, is Snead. Snead has been pretty solid. He dropped a touchdown last week, or he probably would have thrown up the numbers that we're accustomed to seeing. Ben Watson could be a sneaky play because he's getting more and more involved in the passing game. And I remember seeing Hill come up with an ankle or something like that late in the game against Indy, so I'm not sure what his availability would be. And then also at the same time, Mark Ingram, I really like him, even though Kyrie Robinson, his touches, especially in the red zone, irk me because especially I had Ingram going and yeah, he was kind of playing with my flow a little bit. And I was ready to throw something at the screen until Ingram got his later in the game. But still like Ingram, think he's a really good back. And then on the flip side, you never know which Eli and Giants offense you're going to get, but they have a really great matchup. So, especially in the GPPs, I can see Eli to OBJ. You can also get a little Ruben Randall action too. I expect him to get, some involvement. I think they had some running back, I can't even think of his name, score a garbage touchdown last week. So, really wouldn't want to fool with any of the running backs. But then also, I mean, every 2 or 3 weeks or so, you always want to think about Larry Donnell because that's when he'll have a decent game, like every few weeks or so. So maybe this may be his dude. That's just a crapshoot. And when it comes to the defenses, not touching it.
Yeah, I think for me it's Breeze is definitely underpriced, and I thought you had a good point about like, there's certain situations when we should trust stats and recent performance more than others, and when a guy is coming back from an injury, especially like his, I think that same thing with Luck, they're just going to continue to get healthier. They come back, and there's a good chance that I think players like that, especially guys that a team counts on so much, like those guys come back and they're not that healthy. So how many times were there, when you come back from an injury, when you came back from an injury, or other guys that you've played with, Tank, how healthy are you?
You're healthy enough to. It depends on the injury, but a lot of times you're healthy enough to go. So a lot of times you'll labor through an injury for like say 2, 3 weeks or so, and then you get progressively better each and every week. And then there's always just that week where your body feels good. I think you saw with Michael Floyd too. Like I would say, like the first few weeks of the season, like he was just out there. The same with Mike Evans. You just out there, just trying to, hold your place basically. Like Mike Evans dealing with the hamstring, and then kind of correlated with V. Jackson getting hurt, but Mike Evans has come on like the past couple of weeks. Floyd has come on the past couple of weeks. So you have guys like that are banged up and just out there, but then you can start to see the early signs that this guy's healthy because the coaches would target him more, try to get him more involved. So I think that's one major indicator that you can look at. You see a guy who's been struggling, but he's a monster, like look at his targets from week to week and say a Mike Evans who had like maybe one target one week and then he crept up to like maybe 5 targets the next week, 7, 8 targets the following week. He's getting healthier. The coaches want to get him more involved because he can do more for the offense. So just kind of look for those trends and let them be your guide.
Yep. Yeah, so that's sort of my thinking on Breeze or Luck, where we're, maybe some of the struggles we saw are just we shouldn't be placing as much emphasis on that data as with other guys. Yeah, so I think that play that I kind of like for tournaments is Breeze, Cooks, Watson all together. Watson is obviously going to rely more on touchdowns, Cooks with receptions. I think Snead is a value, but not someone who I necessarily like in tournaments because I don't think he has too much upside. Still, it's not like he can't have a big game, so I don't think that it would be a horrible play if you're stacking Breeze with Snead or something like that, but more likely that it's someone like Watson, obviously, who's scoring there, and Cooks getting downfield a little bit, or just seeing more targets in general. Yeah, otherwise I don't really like anyone in this game.
And just to backtrack a little bit too, like just thinking about Ben Roethlisberger. Like Roethlisberger, if he goes, he's probably healthy enough to go. But at the same time, he's going to probably be laboring. He's going to have to work his way through like a couple weeks until you get to see like his usual production. So even though, and I like Antonio Brown, I like Bell, and I like Martavis Bryant, all those guys, it may take a couple weeks until we really see the production we're accustomed to seeing. So, I mean, it could be one of those things where you could play him because you expect some folks to be off of him because he's coming off an injury, but based off that knee injury, his limited mobility, probably teams trying to attack him just to get him off the spot. I mean, you're probably not going to get your bang for your buck until we're probably in another couple of weeks or so. into his play-in.
Cool. All right, so let's move on to the next game. It's Chargers at the Ravens, and this is the second highest over/under of the day. It is at 50 right now, and Ravens are 3-point favorites at home. So that puts Chargers at 23.5 and the Ravens at 26.5. And I think this is kind of an interesting line because I think that Rivers is probably one of my favorite cash game quarterback plays. I think there's actually like what Bales was saying earlier, there's kind of a difference between the line and what their fantasy value may be. I think the Chargers are kind of in that boat where the difference between like how good they are in real life is a big difference from how good they are fantasy potential, just because they're throwing the ball so much. I mean, Rivers is throwing 50 times a game. So I think this kind of an interesting game, kind of even though the line's a little bit weird, high over under. So it's not like the Chargers are low, but yeah, interesting. Tank, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think we all expected Carson Palmer to go into the game and just throw the ball around against the Ravens last week. But, Bruce Arians went into that game with a concerted effort to try to establish the run, and you see Chris Johnson had a really good game. Even though the Chargers would like to run the ball, I mean, they've had their issues with, regardless of who's running the ball, Melvin Gordon, Danny Woodhead, or I don't know why I'm blanking on my boy's name, the little Sproles, mini Sproles. But, when you look at that Chargers offense, they're just trying to throw the ball, or it's just morphing into just pass all the time. And so with this matchup, I'm really high on Phillip Rivers. I think I read something that Antonio Gates will likely be out. I mean, he's struggling with that knee. So I really like Ladarius Green. I've been playing him a lot lately. And I'm not sure what Keenan Allen did, but I think we've talked about this before. He always has his weeks. Like, he gets off one week, just have a so-so week to follow, and I think he may be due this week to get off. So really like him as well. And then a sneaky play could be pick your poison. I mean, I think Stevie Johnson gets a little bit more targets than Floyd, but Floyd is the one that always catches a deep ball or two once every blue moon. So he could be, a good GPP option, even though very low floor. And then on the flip side, I mean, regardless of the matchup, Forsett is an integral part of that offense. The Chargers' run defense is real shitty. So I would expect them to lean on him so Forsett could have himself a game. Flacco's due for like a really good game like every 4 or 5 games. So I can look at this being similar to his game against, I think it was Tampa Bay last year when he threw for like 5 tubs or some shit like that, or similar to the Cleveland game earlier this year where it's just a shootout, a lot of points scored because you have 2 shitty-ass defenses going. So, I guess that's implied too with the over-under of 50, but honestly, I think we could probably see a lot more points scored than that just because, I mean, there's not a lot of resistance coming from both of those defenses. Both of those teams are hungry for a win. They're going to come out aggressively, so I would expect the ball to be flying around early and often and a lot of points to be scored. So Steve Smith's definitely a viable play. And those are the guys I like. Yeah, probably Steve, Flacco, and Forsett on that side of the ball.
Yeah, I think there's 4 really good values in this game. Rivers, who I think is probably the top cash option right now, because if the Chargers are going to score even a decent number of points, he's probably going to have a big game. He accounts for just everything that they're doing right now, which is so important. Another thing that you're looking at with, you can look at the Lions as a gauge, but then you have to adjust for sort of a player's role within an offense, and he has such a high market share of their fantasy production that they can be projected just okay, and he can still be in line for a good game. So Rivers, I think Stevie Johnson is maybe one of the top values at receiver. Wouldn't use him in tournaments, I don't think, because I think that's more of a dollar per point type of value than it is upside per point, so to speak. And then the opposite of that would be Ladarius Green if Gates is out. Is more of an upside play because I think he's a really talented player. So it just come down to how much they're going to use him. So there's a good chance that they just don't use him that much. And then on the other side of the offense, the player who I like is Forsett. I think he's underpriced. And another guy who is probably safe for cash games that I'm going to use in cash games because even if they're down 7 points in the second half, he could catch a few balls and still he just has a really nice floor against most opponents.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think Rivers is probably my favorite cash guy right now. And I think Ladarius actually might be one of my top tight end cash options. I was actually working the NFL news for our Fantasy Lab site earlier today, and one of the beat writers was talking about Gates and said that even though he was a game time decision, he actually wasn't very close to going on Sunday and could be out for a couple weeks, actually, not just questionable for this week. So it kind of is not looking good for Gates, so this might be a Ladarius Green game. Which kind of brings me to a strategy question. I've gotten asked a lot about this in both basketball and football, and it's kind of interesting to try to think about them together. Bales, are you okay with stacking in cash games? Like if you think that Rivers and Ladarius are the best values at their position, you're fine with that?
Yeah, sometimes, but it depends less on the value. I think you're looking for value always in cash games, but it doesn't matter as much about that as it does that I think the safety of them having big games together. So almost would never do it on a team that's projected to score under, say, like 25 or 26 points. It needs to be a pretty high implied team total for me to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So you
but
would do it here.
what was that? I would.
You would not do it here in that situation.
Well, I wouldn't do it because I don't think Ladarius Green is a great cash game tight
Okay.
end anyway. There's some other players who I would probably play there, but if I did like him, I wouldn't necessarily have a problem with Rivers to Stevie Johnson in cash. I think that would potentially be okay, and I might even play. I don't know. I haven't done my lineups yet, but that would be something that I might be okay with. But I would say no. I stack fairly often in cash games. It's not like you never want to take on risk. I'd be more likely to do it in head-to-heads than in 50-50s, where upside, you're rewarded for upside in head-to-heads, not as much in 50-50s. Once you cross the cash line, that extra upside doesn't actually help you. But yeah, as long as there's more upside than there is risk, I think it makes sense in the head-to-head games. And I'd say I've stacked in a decent number, more than most people, maybe 25% of my cash games I stack.
Interesting. Yeah, and I guess I see it a lot. I mean, like obviously, like you see it in these high like implied points. So like obviously, like a Brady Edelman is, some people will do that, or even a Brady Lewis or something earlier in the season. But yeah, I thought it was interesting, kind of with a lower implied point, but still kind of maybe value guys. So yeah, so let's move on. Our next game is a super ugly one. It's lowest of the slate, and I think maybe lowest of the season so far. At least that I can remember off the top of my head. It's 49ers at the Rams, and over/under is 39.5. And it's a low over/under, but pretty high spread. Rams are 8-point favorites, so it puts the 49ers at implied points of 15.8, which is not good. And Rams at 23.8, so maybe another Gurley Rams defense stack weekend potentially. Tank, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, we can make this one quick because it's a pretty ugly game. Ty Gurley, as you said, probably a Rams defense, and if you want to get a little freaky, throw a little Tavon Austin action in there, saying he may return a punt or do something like that. But yeah, I mean, we've already talked about Nick Foles at length. I don't want anything to do with him. Nothing to do with the St. Louis Rams receivers. I mean, I really don't like Tavon. They try to get him, integrated into the offense a fair amount, but I mean, he just has a really good game once every blue moon. Gurley's the man. The whole offense goes through him. Has a really good matchup, and that San Francisco offense, man, they got some serious issues. Like, yeah, someone just needs to go and then just drop a bomb on all that shit because it's ugly. So I'm not touching any of that probably for the rest of the year, just to be honest. That's
Yeah,
all.
Rams and Gurley. That's it.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Bomb that shit. Man, that San Francisco offense is nasty. And the fans out here are heated, too. That shit is funny, but it's real. Yeah, man.
Yeah, they're so bad. All right, so let's keep moving since pretty straightforward there. Bucks Falcons is the next game. So we're back at high over under. It's 48.5. Falcons are pretty sizable favorites. They're at 7.5 as of this morning. So it puts the Bucks at 20.5 and the Falcons at 28. So Tank, what are your thoughts on this? Maybe a little more fantasy goodness here.
Matty Ice has been playing, so-so the last few weeks. I mean, he usually has a really good game every now and then. I mean, I'm not sure if he was injured or something. He said he wasn't, but he's been struggling a little bit. But this could be the game that Julio gets back on track and throwing up numbers that we were seeing earlier this year. And Matty Ice throws for maybe like 3 tubs or something like that. So I really like them. I like Devontae too, just because, Tampa's been pretty bad against the pass, and at least going into the game last week, Devontae was their second leading receiver. I mean, that probably still remains true. So, I mean, he's been a monster. He had an off game last week and still put up solid production. So, can't go wrong with him. Like those guys, I mean, Tammy could be a sneaky play for them in the pass game. Hankerson got zeroed last week. I'm not sure if he got banged up or something like that. But we're used to seeing him getting targeted a little bit more than that. Really don't want to mess with Roddy. That damn Atlanta defense has been pretty opportunistic this year, too. I mean, it's been an amazing turnaround. I expect Dan Quinn. I mean, I knew he was going to put his fingerprints all over that defense, but they've been playing really good ball, getting a lot of turnovers, and really the trend hasn't stopped. And so when you're playing a young quarterback who's been turnover prone all this year, I mean, their defense could be a sneaky good play. And then on the flip side, I mean, at the same time, Atlanta's defense is giving up plays every now and then. And Tampa's Bay offenses has been running, basically just going through Doug Martin. So, I mean, I think he's going to get a lot of touches. Is he healthy? Because I heard some people really high on Charles Sims this week.
I think he is.
Yeah.
I haven't seen any news
Yeah,
that says he's
I
not.
heard earlier today some folks were really high saying that Charles Sims is going to be the man this week. I'm not sure. But,
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
yeah, I think if anyone on that Tampa, I mean, maybe Doug Martin and GPP is just saying that he has a chance to get off, highly unlikely. Mike Evans, since V. Jax is out and Lewis Murphy is hurt. I mean, Mike Evans is all they have, but at the same time, kind of like we were talking about with Kelsey, you'll think he'll have an opportunity to get off because he's the only guy, but when you're the only guy, that means all the attention is going to be on you. So it's going to be tough sledding for him more than likely. They'll probably just take him away and force someone else to beat him. So really not a lot of opportunities on that Tampa side of the ball as you talk through it. And then looks like the riches are definitely with the Falcons this week.
Yeah, I think there's only one cash game option for me in this game, and that's Devonta Freeman, who I'll have a good bit of. And, yeah, I mean, even in a down game last week, he had over 100 yards. So he's just, like, crushing. I think he's a good player. They're in a really good situation. They're 7.5-point favorites. They're projected to score second most points of any team this week. So, yeah, he's one of the top 3 fantasy backs in the league right now for sure. Maybe the top back.
Probably
He's probably number 1 this week for me in terms of pure points. And then so he's the only cash game option. I think Julio and Mike Evans, just because of the type of players they are. Julio's overpriced probably relative to some of the other top receivers, but those guys can just go for like 200 yards and 2 touchdowns or 3 touchdowns at any time. So fine with those guys. And Falcons I won't have in cash, the defense, but I will probably play them in tournaments because 7.5-point favorite, you're at home facing Winston, who's going to probably turn the ball over. That's going to be a pretty good situation for them, I think.
Agreed. Yeah. So actually, I don't know how you judge running backs as far as who's the best one of the season, but the three top running backs in terms of most yards this season, number one is Devontae, but number three is actually Doug Martin. So, for whatever that's worth. So, do you guys think that Freeman is good? I mean, like it seems crazy to say like, yeah, he's like bad because of what he's been doing, but it just what last year was weird to this year. I don't think I've got a chance to ask you. What are your thoughts on him last year to him this year? Like, were you? I mean, I'm sure you're probably surprised early on, but what are your thoughts on him now?
I mean, well, really, it takes guys, a little bit of time to learn how to play and be successful in the league. I mean, because in college, like everyone, I mean, you're kind of better than everyone else, like the guys that make it, and so, I mean, I guess you don't have to spend that much energy to kind of excel on a weekly basis, especially when you're playing for Florida State. So it looks like he wasn't really familiar with the offense. He really wasn't playing that aggressively, and so he was just a guy out there last year, and that's what I expected this year. But, they draft the running back high. That's extra motivation. They tried to start the other running back before him. I think he dealt with some injuries last year too. And so basically I think I said it earlier this year, like the way Freeman's playing now, he's playing how Mark Ingram played when he was trying to get a contract, how Doug Martin's playing right now because he's trying to get a contract. Like a switch has to flip, and then you just have to get hungry. And you have to play with a chip on your shoulder. You have to play angry. That's how he's running. That's how he's playing. He has a better grasp of the system. He's talented. He's not the most talented back. He's not in the echelon with, a Ty Gurley or Le'Veon Bell as far as athleticism, but he's not just one of those backs like, say, like a Toby Gerhardt when he was at Stanford where he's just the guy, but you put him behind a good offensive line, he's going to, give you like 150 yards or 2 tubs just based off that. So, I mean, he's probably in that.
Was he your teammate?
Who, Toby?
Yeah.
Nah. Come on, I'm a lot older than that. Thanks for the compliment, though, dog.
Well, how far away were you from him? Like when he was.
I was retired, I believe, when Toby was still in school.
Right.
Hey, I drink from the fountain of youth, dog. Banana.
I thought Toby's pretty old though now.
Yeah, I thought he was old too.
No, I thought that you could have been within 4 years of him for sure.
I mean, I put it like this. I was in Minnesota. My first year there was Adrian Peterson's rookie year. And by the time I left, Minnie went to New England. I think maybe, Toby wasn't even there yet, I don't believe. So, yeah. But basically, that was a long-winded way of saying that. I mean, I don't think he's like the most talented back, but he's probably in the top quarter of the backs in the league, and plus you put that in a good offensive system with good players around where they don't have to focus on him, then he's definitely legit.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I can argue. Maybe drafting Tevin Coleman was the best thing for him. Kind of lit a fire in him. So let's move on. We got a couple games left. The next game on the slate is Titans at Texans. We don't have a line again on this one because question is whether Mariota is going to play. Again, I was working the news, so I'm kind of up to date on stuff. Mariota was a participant in all the individual drills today. It kind of looks to be on track for this weekend, but still definitely monitor that. I think if he does not play, then you could probably avoid these games. But I actually think this game is pretty interesting, especially from the Mariota standpoint, if he does play, just because we saw the Texans give up, 41 points in the first half to the Dolphins. And, I mean, that was a beating of all beatings. That was ugly. Yeah, Tank, what are your thoughts on this one? Are you kind of similar thoughts?
Tell me if you remember this. You remember the Tampa Bay Buccaneers getting their asses whooped last year? And then I think they went into, I think they got beat by Atlanta maybe or something like that in Atlanta. And then they came back and then they upset someone. Like, people are getting paid on both ends and people have pride. And Ryan Mallett's head rolled. If they continue to struggle, there's probably going to be a lot of guys on the team and the coaches losing their jobs. So, I would expect a lot of people to bank on, seeing a similar performance from the Titans against Houston and being thoroughly disappointed. I think that defense is going to come out and play aggressively, and especially if Mariota plays with a bum knee. Like, White and those guys are going to come out with their damn ears pinned back and on a mission. So this is going to be a really close. I mean, it's going to be played really close, just for the simple fact that Tennessee, they've been reeling. They lost a close game to a really good team in Atlanta. Houston, even though we didn't call it, got the fist, and they got it good. I mean, that was the driest, biggest fist you can get, and they just took that shit. So when I look at that, I think this is going to be probably a low-scoring game, very competitive, and whatever the spread is, I mean, this would probably end up being the lowest scoring game of the week, actually, now that I think about it. But, I mean, I wouldn't put a lot of my eggs on Tennessee's basket, just thinking that they're going to blow them out like the Dolphins and see like a double fisting. Oh, that would be nice to see a double fisting, but I don't think it's going to go down this week. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I like the Texans' defense, and then DeAndre is averaging 15.3 targets, I think, over the past month. So with that workload, if he's going to continue to get that, he doesn't even need to be efficient. So DeAndre is pretty much in play every week. I don't like him in cash games as much, even with the workload, because I think that there's some cheaper options at receiver. I wouldn't blame someone for playing him just because I think that there's a super high floor.
And no Foster, too.
Yeah, with him given that workload. I still don't like the running backs there. Foster was out in the beginning of the year, and they didn't do anything. But that is going to be it. I don't think that there's anyone else that's really playable in this game. Even like under the radar guys that you're looking at, I don't think that there's anyone that I'm really interested even in GPPs.
Yeah, Nate Washington has been sneaky good for him every now and then. But, I mean, he had a decent game last week. And I would expect that to go into 2 weeks in a row. I mean, I think if anyone's going to get off here against the Titans, more than likely is going to be everything focused on DeAndre with the absence of Arian.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that matches up with the Tennessee tight end. I mean, I like Delaney Walker against Houston just because they've struggled with tight ends the past 2 years, maybe even 3. So, I mean,
I actually overlooked him. I lied. I like Delaney.
Yeah.
Good.
He uses Delaney the past few weeks, and he's been doing A-okay for you, boy.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. I was gonna make a point. What was my point? I don't know. Okay, so let's move on. Jets and Raiders is the next game. Over/under is 44, so this is kind of on the lower end. And Jets are 2-point favorites on the road. So that puts Jets at 23 and Raiders at 21. So, Tank, what are your thoughts? Raiders are actually not bad, you know?
No, the Raiders aren't bad. I like them. I mean, I think we talked about earlier in the year about that Carr to Cooper connection, and damn, it looked really good against the Chargers, but they're playing an entirely different defense this week, and it's a defense coming off a tough loss to New England, so I think the Jets are going to try to get back on track. The Raiders may come into the game, you know, a little nonchalant because they got a huge win in San Diego that, I mean, I wouldn't say they didn't expect it because they know they're a decent team, but they haven't won down there in a while. So I'm not sure with a young team that they'll be able to maintain that focus that New England and Green Bay and that you're accustomed to seeing those other teams doing. So you could see the Raiders regress and the Jets are going to be charged up and going to be focused. So, I mean, thinking along those lines, I mean, I think the Jets' defense is in play just because they may get after Carr early. They have to try to play from behind, try to come back. He's throwing a lot of highly contested balls, and then they're picking off balls, maybe taking it in the end zone. And, I mean, I really like Carr, but it could just be one of those games that gets out of hand on them early just because the Jets really need this one. You know, the Raiders' run defense has been pretty solid this year, and Chris Ivory's hurt. You may be able to get a cheaper option, you know, whether it's Zach Stacy or someone like that, even though I wouldn't put a lot of weight on them. You know, Fitzpatrick has been sneaky good this year. You know, playing against that Raiders pass defense who played well early on, but then you saw what Phillip Rivers did down the stretch. And, you know, having Marshall having Eric Decker at your disposal. I mean, I'm not sure what he's priced, but I'm pretty sure he's in the low 5,000s. He could be, a sneaky good play, especially with Chris Ivory banged up, so they may lean a little bit more on the pass with his injury and also factoring in the Raiders being pretty solid against the run. So that wouldn't be a bad way to go. And, I mean, Amari Cooper's a stud, so maybe playing him in the GPP is just saying that,
Who's going to be on him, Tank?
Who's going to be on him? I mean, if they're going to match up, I would probably say that it'll be Revis on Amari Cooper, and then they'll put Cromartie on Crabtree.
That was my thoughts, too.
Yeah, that's probably how they'll do it.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, too, where, I mean, that'll definitely impact his production. But, I mean, he's such a talented player. If he gets the volume of targets, then I mean, that's the thing, too. Like, some quarterbacks should probably just steer clear of Revis. Like, I think Carr is overly
confident
at times, and he really thinks Amari's talented. So he may test Revis some. Not saying that Cooper's going to get off, but he may get a decent look. So he may be worth a GPP play, but I wouldn't have him highly involved in the lineups.
Yeah, I don't think there's anyone here to use in cash games. I kind of like Decker a bit, and because I think he's a really talented player. I believe he's 5,300. Yeah, I just think that he's underrated. As he's not elite, but he's in the second tier of receivers, and he's not priced like it. He can convert red zone looks into touchdowns, so he can score. He has a lot of the traits that I would look for in a receiver. I tend to roster the same types of receivers again and again. And then I do kind of like Crabtree actually for Oakland, because I do think Cooper's going to get Revis. And then I don't if the Jets are sort of going to roll coverage. Sometimes they leave Revis on an island and then roll coverage over top of Cromartie. That would be bad, but I don't think that they're doing that quite as much, and then they're certainly not doing it every play. So I think Crabtree is in play, not in cash games, though.
Yeah, agreed. And Crabtree's getting a ton of targets. He got a lot of targets the last 2 weeks. So I think I agree on those points. So let's keep on moving. We got 3 more games left. We got Seahawks and Cowboys. This is one of the second lowest over/under of the slate. Seahawks are 6-point favorites, and the over/under is at 41. So put Seahawks at 23.5 and the boys at 17.5. So interesting game. Vegas doesn't think there's a whole lot here, but maybe so. Tank, what are your thoughts?
First thing that jumps out is the Seahawks defense, because regardless of whether it's, Matt Castle or Brandon Wheaton, both of those guys are turnover prone. It's the Seahawks seem to have gotten that act together, at least a little bit, playing against the 49ers on a short week on the road. So that was good to see them play well on the road. Usually they play well at home and a little so-so on the road. So, I mean, I think they can replicate that performance against the Cowboys this week. One thing that's worth noting is that the Seahawks have given up some yardage in the run game. I mean, I think Jonathan Stewart had a decent game against them a couple of weeks back, and I'm not mistaken, the Bengals ran pretty well against them too. The only thing I worry about is that they're going to say, all right, we're going to stop run DMC and make Matt Castle beat us. And that shit ain't going to happen. So if that's the case, then the Cowboys' offense will struggle mightily. But, I mean, I guess Run DMC will probably be cheap. Don't love the matchup, but, to go contrary and just think, all right, maybe he'll get off and maybe pop one against the Seahawks. I mean, it could happen. Other than that, man, we're not touching anyone. Jimmy Graham, I mean, boy, he's been fisting cats all year. And I mean, in the perfect example with him, like Jimmy Graham, I just let his ass ride in like one of my season-long lineups. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to take him out. And then right when I took him out, he went for like 140-something. I was like, you bitch. And then I put him back in, and then he fisted me again. So, man, dog, like, I really don't know what to do with that cat. But I tell you, like, if I saw that cat in, like, person, like, he tried to sell all those wolf tickets on the field, like, I'd probably steal on that cat if I saw him in person, like, word up. Like, hey, I'd probably have to hurt that dude. And it's not his fault. Because I guess I should do that to Bevel. You know, Bevel and I are cool from my days in Minnesota, but I mean, the way they're using him and the way he's just been abusing his owners, whether it's in daily games or season-long plays, man, that shit just ain't right. So I had to get that little rant out. But other than that, Seahawks defense and, I mean, maybe, I don't know, man, whatever, man. I'm done talking about them. Like, Jimmy Graham got me pissed off right now. Go ahead, Bales. I'm done.
Yeah, I love the Seahawks defense. They're one of my favorite plays because, I think that they're going to be up. They are on the road, but they're facing a quarterback now. It's in Castle, who's going to take chances downfield. We saw him make a couple plays against the Giants last week. He had a great throw in the back of the end zone to Devin Street. He had some other good throws, and then he had some awful throws. He got picked off by Cromartie twice, once at the sideline, which was a horrible throw. He threw up a duck down the sideline to Terrence Williams. He's going to take chances, and that's what you want looking at a defense. McFadden, I think, is going to come out as a good value no matter what because it looks like he's going to start. He's going to get carries. But he is not – he's a player I think is a trap because he's definitely a good value, but the game script probably won't work out in his favor. And then if Whedon were in the game, I would say, okay, this is a situation where he could just get more receptions. We saw – I believe against the Patriots, he had 10 targets. Whedon just kept checking down to him at the end of the game. Castle's not going to do that as much. He had 2 targets against the Giants, despite being in almost the entire game. So not really as high on McFadden, I think, as some other people will be. I don't think there's going to be crazy ownership on him, but I think people realize that the Seahawks run defense isn't like truly elite. It's just okay, where some people will have him in tournaments because of his workload and production last week, and I don't actually like that play.
Yo, so tell me what you think about Jimmy Graham.
Yeah, Jimmy Graham's an elite player, and they just he's with a bad quarterback, I think, who's going to move around and wait for guys to get wide open, and no, a bad quarterback for him.
Okay.
No, I love Russell Wilson. I think Russell Wilson is actually an underrated quarterback. A bad quarterback for his fantasy production because he moves around and waits for guys to get open, almost similar to Romo. Romo doesn't scramble like him, but Romo is another guy who waits for guys a little bit to get open. He's transitioned a bit, and it took some time for him to transition and trust Dez, who doesn't necessarily get wide open, and you just need to sort of throw it to him. Jimmy Graham's not going to get wide open. He's not that guy. It's a guy who you back shoulder, you just throw it to him in traffic, and he's just so big and strong that he can use his body. And Wilson hasn't done that up until this point. I think that eventually he's going to learn to do that, but right now he's not. So I think that more than anything is what is costing Graham. I don't think it's anything to do with Jimmy Graham.
Is that just because it takes time to learn that trust? Maybe Tank, that's a good question for you since you played in the league. Does it just take a while to trust your teammates to have your back?
I mean, honestly, I don't see why it would take that damn long. I mean, I think all of us saw the connection that Breeze and Jimmy Graham had, and I mean, he would throw the ball up with 2-3 people around Jimmy, and somehow that monster would come down with the ball. So,
yeah.
I mean, maybe he's a little slow, but for me, it seemed like as soon as they put the ink on the contract, he'd be like, all right, there's going to be maybe 5 plays a game where this dude may look like it's covered, but I'm going to just throw it up and see what happens just because he's that type of talent. So, you have to earn the trust of your players regardless of if it's offense or defense, but for me, it seemed like that learning curve should have been over with a long time ago. Yeah,
you'd think so, but I don't think – I think he knows like he has to trust him. It's just that this has been his game for a while. This is what he does. If that – like first read isn't there and then the next guy's sort of covered, he's going to move around. He definitely does a really good job of moving around in the pocket and buying time as opposed to just taking off and running. And then if it's really not there, then he will run and he adds a ton of value. And again, I think Russell Wilson, I think he's a better quarterback than I would say what most people do. But that's what he does, so that's just sort of his game. So maybe that is going to take longer for him to transition out of.
One thing I need to look at is like how he actually throws, because like I'm interested now to see what Russell Wilson calls open versus what like a Brady or a Breeze or someone like that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think Breeze throws guys open, and Russell Wilson
and he
can
just
do that, but he's
not open.
Yeah, he's gonna rely on his legs more, which maybe he should. Maybe that's best for the team because he's so good at doing that. But it doesn't help Graham.
Cool. Good discussion. So let's keep on moving. We got 2 games left. Sunday night game is Packers and Broncos. So kind of middle, maybe a little higher than middle. Over/under is 45.5. Packers are 3-point favorites. So implied points for Packers are 24.25, and Broncos are 21.25. So yeah, interesting game. I'm curious what your guys' thoughts are as far as fantasy value. I think it'll be a great game. Real life football.
Yeah, I think it'll be a really great game, real life football. I actually like looking at the implied points now. I think that may be high. For the simple fact that Denver's defense is really good, and I look at how the Packers beat the Niners the other week, where it was like a 17-3 game, something like that. And then, I was kind of bumping my chest a little bit earlier this year because everyone was saying, Peyton Manning is dead, Peyton Manning is dead, and he came back and had a decent game. I was like, no, he's not dead. Shit, Peyton Manning is dead, man. That noodle arm is done. And so basically the Broncos defense has just been keeping them in it. And when you're playing against an aggressive defense like the Packers, they're probably going to be hounding them. I wouldn't be surprised if he has like a couple picks in this game. One goes to the house. It seems like the Broncos return, a pick 6 every week. And even though he's playing, well, shit, who am I thinking about? I'm committed. I'm talking about, that's how bad Peyton is. I'm talking about his defense picking him off and returning for a touchdown. Hell yeah. But that long story short, yeah, Peyton's bad. Peyton's so bad he'll throw a pick to his own defense. So I really don't like them in this matchup. Damn, how'd I get that far off track? I have no idea.
We never know, Tank.
When I kind of go through it, yeah, it's tough sledding for A-Rod and them. So, yeah, I'm actually interested to hear what Bales thinks about some of these matchups because, I think some players are so good. Like Aaron Rodgers is good. So, you can justify playing them in either matchup. Cobb has been struggling. You have Devontae Adams coming back now. How's that going to affect James Jones? And then on the flip side, you have Peyton, who's been struggling. The matchup against the Packers really isn't that bad, but the offensive line is terrible. So the running backs have been struggling. Hillman just came on. So what do you do with Hillman, C.J. Anderson? Demaris has just been solid, but hasn't been blowing up. Emmanuel Sanders got off last week before the bye, but then he has a banged-up shoulder. So, there's a lot of shit going on with this one. It may be one of those deals where I just want to avoid it because I'm not sure what's going on. Or you can take a bet with someone and then be the only one on it and get all that upside. So.
Well, it sounds like what you're describing is the perfect GPP game, and we have Mr. GPP here. So yeah, here we go.
I'm gonna disagree and say that it's not because I think that the teams and what people think of these offenses is better than what the reality is for the game. Where I don't think it's going to be a high-scoring game. So I think that. Yeah, maybe I'm wrong, but I do think that people are going to be on some guys in the game just because the offenses at least have talented players. Peyton's struggling, but we still know that the Broncos have some good receivers, and I think that there's it's interesting because there's 3 receivers who are, in my opinion, are underpriced in the game, and that's Demarius. Even taking into account Peyton and the lines and the defenses. I think Demarius, who is still getting a ton of targets, still has a lot of yards, but has only scored 1 time this year. And there's no way, even with how bad the offense is playing, that continues where he scores once every 7 weeks or he's going to end the season with 2 touchdowns. No chance that happens. Emmanuel Sanders, who eats up targets, I think is underpriced. And then if you're willing to bite the bullet on Peyton, or even if you're not, just run out just Sanders and Thomas together with you could go like Cam, who you don't have to stack with in a tournament. So much of the Broncos offense goes through, when they're passing, it goes through those 2 receivers. So it's very unlikely that Peyton would have even a decent game without Demarius and Emmanuel having big games. And they don't cannibalize each other in the same way as maybe Michael Floyd and Fitzgerald, who are both reliant. They both rely maybe a little bit more heavily on touchdowns, certainly than Emmanuel. So. Yeah, I think that those guys are good values and okay in tournaments. And I think Cobb is underpriced. Broncos' pass defense is awesome, but maybe where he lines up is we'll have to do. I have to do a little bit more research. We have to see if we can figure out through the course of the week who might be covering him. But where the Broncos are maybe susceptible could be the area of the field where Cobb generally works. And because he's been so bad the past 3 or 4 weeks, I think that he's not going to be popular at all.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, especially against this Broncos defense. So yeah, that's interesting. The Broncos, those 2 wide receivers in a naked, like 2 wide receivers stacked without Peyton. I've never even thought about that or even considered it.
Me neither until right now, but I like it.
Yeah. So, but I guess you're saying, but is there a situation where they have amazing games and Peyton doesn't?
Yeah, I think so. I think that they could easily have I don't think it's super likely. I still would be playing Peyton with them. I don't think it's impossible that Peyton.
But I guess
and he could just be so smart of a player that he can overcome the physical limitations. And there's been a couple games this year where he hasn't actually been that bad. I think it's there's definitely he's not playing very well, but it's not like he can't possibly have a big game. I think that's maybe taking. But yeah, I think you could have something where it's 100 yards for both of them, 2 touchdowns, and then he's just not throwing to anyone else.
In a interception or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair, I guess. I guess if you think that the market share is all going to go to those 2 guys, then yeah, that's probably the case, to be honest. So, interesting. We've talked in the past about a double wide receiver stack, and we talked about how even early. I would encourage you to go listen to the podcast that Bales and I did before the season. It was just on strategy, not even about plays at all. And we talked about this, kind of the the underutilized different types of stacks and correlations you could do. And we talked about the double wide receiver, but never a double wide receiver without the quarterback. So yeah, interesting. If it takes down a lot of money this weekend, then
yeah.
Then there you go. All right, so let's finish it up. We got one more game left. It's the Monday night game, and it is Colts at the Panthers, the undefeated Panthers, I might add. Over/under is 46.5. Panthers are 7-point favorites against the Colts, which is fairly interesting. I don't think anyone probably would have guessed that before the season. And implied points for the Colts pretty low, 19.8, and the Panthers are up at 26.8. So yeah, so interesting. Tank, I'm really curious to hear your thoughts about this and kind of just how good these teams are in general.
I mean, I can recall the past couple years where Cam will have a few really good outings and then have a really bad game. And then people have the Hello Kitties underneath his jersey instead of the Superman. But that dude's been Superman every game this year, and he's been kind of in some of the talk for MVP. He wouldn't get it because his numbers don't justify it, and this league is so based on numbers and stuff like that. But, I mean, I think what he's doing and with the talent that he has around him has been really impressive because, I mean, if you look at his number 1 receiving threat, it's his tight end, Greg Olsen. And when you look at Olsen, I mean, he's a talented guy. I think he had a little bit more juice to him and stuff like that when his earlier years in Carolina, and then when he's in Chicago, he's kind of up there in age now. Still really effective, still a really good player, and knows how to work, his opponent, knows how to get open in areas of the field. But I mean, I wouldn't look at him as an elite talent at tight end, at least not in this stage of his career. And the running game has, been getting better as the year progressed, but it's not mind-boggling by any means. So, I mean, it's just basically been, a great team effort, and Cam just playing, really good ball and just doing whatever they need him to do. game, and now he's getting matched up against this Colts defense that is playing a little bit better against the run than what we've used to seeing. But at the same time, I mean, you see Mark Ingram and Kyrie Robinson, all these guys getting off on them. So I mean, they still give up their yards, and so I mean, yeah, I think Cam, Olsen are the plays. Jonathan Stewart is definitely in play, even though Cam and Tolbert vultures the touchdowns away from him.
Yeah.
When you think about the pass catchers, I mean, they all have really low floors, but I mean, Ted Ginn can have a really good game. Philly Brown can have a really good game and a good matchup like this one, but I mean, it's just really hard to predict. On the flip side, I mean, this could be one of those ugly. I mean, the Panthers really don't throw up a lot of points just based on how they play, even though they could against this Colts defense. So even if Luck and those guys are playing from behind, I don't know like how much garbage yards and stuff like that he accumulates. Even though, I mean, it's a tougher matchup too against the Panthers defense. He's playing a little bit better, but he still looks really bad in a really bad matchup. So. Yeah, I really don't know how much I like him or any of the other guys. I mean, I think Norman pretty much plays his side, so I'm not sure how much he's going to be on TY, but I mean, I really like Norman as a player. He's been playing probably the best.
He's been amazing.
Yeah, this year, I mean, he's probably the best corner by far this year. So,
yeah,
so really tough matchups for the Colts. And if Luck keeps turning over the ball, that Panthers defense could definitely be in play as well.
Yeah, the 19.8 implied points for the Colts is like very surprising to me because I would have thought that they would have been at like 23 or something in this game. So I think that they are in a bad spot. I think that the play for me is Cam Newton, who I think you can play in every league type, and I think that you can stack him with Olsen if you'd like. Or
with Demarius and Emmanuel.
Yep. Yeah, either or all three.
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
And then Stewart is interesting, but Tank had a good point that he's getting his touchdowns stolen from him. So I think that I won't have too much Stewart even though I think he's maybe a bit underpriced and in a good matchup. There's a good chance that he runs for like 120 yards or something in this game, but probably not that great of a touchdown probability because Cam steals so many of those touchdowns once they get inside the 5-yard line. And then I think that he doesn't have a lot of upside for that reason. And then in cash games, probably a little bit risky or a lot risky because we think that the Panthers are going to be up. The line looks good, but the Colts are like a very high variance team where I could easily, even though they're projected at a certain number, I could easily see them putting up like 17 points in the first quarter or something and just getting up early because that's sort of the type of team they are. They do have some good playmakers. They still have Andrew Luck. They're going to have to throw the ball, so weird things can happen. So I'm not that confident that the Panthers, even being 7-point favorites, are going to be up as I would, for example, that the Falcons are going to be up on the Bucs or something like that.
So Bales, slate without like if we're talking the Sunday like 1 p.m. slate, so a slate without Gronk, without Kelsey. Where are you looking tight ends? I know we're not necessarily going by positions, but I feel like we kind of skipped over tight ends a little bit in this pod. But just curious who your favorite maybe cash guy is right now.
I still think it's Delaney Walker for me.
Okay.
Yeah. I had skipped over him and
now he's your favorite cash game guy.
Well, I still had him.
You were trying to keep that one close to the best. That's how that was. Bales
he was like, yeah, no Titans, and then he was like, oh, come on, Tank, giving away my tight end cash guy.
Nah, I never do that.
Cool. All right, good stuff, guys. All right, we'll end it there. And yeah, some interesting games this week. I'm excited. We finally got two sports going on, so we're definitely busy here at Fantasy Labs, but definitely a lot of things to keep us busy. You know, can have multiple slates going on at the same time in different sports. So yeah, so good stuff going on, and good luck in week 8. And I guess we'll talk to you guys next week.
Yes, sir. Straight cash, homie.